All right, so I'm glad you guys are all here for this little presentation. It won't be too long because it's just the basics, but really, there's not a whole lot of fancy stuff you can do. You either use it or you don't, and I guess it's just a matter of figuring out when to use it. And first off, I'm going to start out by kind of telling you a little bit about it. So let's talk about what kind of polarizers there are, just so you know. If you haven't purchased one yet, you don't have one, just in case somebody has said, hey, I got a whole bunch of old photography stuff in my closet, from Grandpa, he used to take pictures all the time, and you find a polarizer in there, you will want to make sure that you know what kind it is, because there's different types. So there's linear and there's circular, and it doesn't have anything to do with the shape of the filter being a circle. That's not why they call it a circular polarizer. It has to do with the way it actually polarizes the light. So there's something about the film in there that's different from one to the other. So I wanted you to know that just in case you would be shopping online or somebody had an old one that they offered to you, to know that a linear does not work with digital photography. So linear polarizers were developed back a while ago, back when there was film, and so it worked with that. But it affects the autofocus and the auto metering on the digital, or it doesn't work with the autofocus and the auto metering. So therefore, you need to be talking about and using and purchasing a circular polarizer. So that's what you want. So now let's talk about what kind to buy. They are anywhere from expensive to cheap. So I looked online and I found out you can buy a circular polarizer that runs anywhere from $5 to $900. And that's a huge span of price. And a lot of times they'll say, well, you get what you pay for. And so if that were the case, you would think, oh, I need to spend $900 to get a really good one. And that in this case or in this situation is not the case. So while I wouldn't go down to a $5 polarizer for various reasons, which I'll get into in just a minute, I also don't think that it is worth $900 to get a good one. And I'm basing that not only on my experience, but what I've heard from people that are more experienced than myself, that while they're $900, they're really not doing anything more than those ones that are valued more down at around the $100 or $150 range. So while you don't want to go to $5, you certainly don't have to go up to $900 to be able to have a polarizer that will do a good job for you. So also note that the prices for a polarizer, as they do with most filters, will vary according to, well, the quality, yes, so sort of, but definitely the size. So if you're using a small one, like a 48 or 46 millimeter size, it's going to be cheaper than one that's 82 millimeter. So that's just the way it seems to work with filters. More material, more expense, I guess. So let's talk about the difference between filters. And this is a slide that I received from Camera Corner. And so he put this together, and I think it illustrates it pretty nicely. You can see that a cheap filter is made out of sheet glass, and that's what that first picture is representing, just a sheet glass, and then they cut the size they need out of it, and they put it in a frame that you would screw onto your lens. But the frames and the coatings and the glass are all of a low quality. And then there's a higher end filter, and those are made of optical glass. So, and in this situation, he's showing us that it's a cylinder, and then they take and they cut slices off of the cylinder of glass, and they polish it, and then they attach the coatings to it and the filter layer to it. And they put it in a ring, and the ring is usually a higher quality material. So you don't want to get a ring that's too inexpensive, because if you would happen to get it cross-threaded on your lens, it can actually, those cheap ones are real cheap aluminum, and they might mess with the threading on it, so it will ruin it. and then you'll have to fight to get it off and on. Where some of the higher end filters, well, you still use aluminum, but it's a higher type of aluminum, higher quality type. They also can make filters out of brass. That's another material. I've seen a few that have been steel or maybe a plastic of some sort. But generally speaking, it's a nice grade of aluminum or it is a brass one. So what kind of qualities do you need to look for if you are in the market for a circular polarizer? And they go by CPLs. That's what that stands for, circular polarizer. And you need to maybe consider the thin profile is available, and you need to decide if maybe that's a line that you want to go down. I opted for a thin profile on my filter. And what that means is it's not as thick as some of the ones that aren't considered thin profile. They can be maybe 1/4 of an inch thick, maybe 3/16 inch thick, which doesn't seem like very thick, but when you are shooting with a wider angled lens, so your focal length is on the wide side, you get that angle of view out there, so you can start catching the edge of the frame of the filter if your filter is too thick. So you want to maybe consider a thin profile. And I have liked my thin profile one that I've gotten. And I will show you a photo that I took when I was using a thicker one and a wider angle of view on my picture, and you'll see exactly what happens. So I'll show you that coming up here later. Another thing is they will have coatings on them. They call them multi-coating. I don't know exactly what kind of coatings they're putting on there, but I know, again, I had a cheap one, and I've had cheaper filters, and you will touch it accidentally with your finger, or it gets a spot on it from who knows what, and you cannot get those off sometimes. I don't know what it is about that glass, and if you touch it or get something on it, you cannot clean it. So these multi-coatings will help you, when they're the higher quality, help you be able to keep it clean easily. And that's, once you have one, it doesn't come off. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about, and it'll be worth a little bit more to make sure you can continue to use it without a big smear on it that you can't remove. There's also different quality of glass. And so that's very important because you've spent a lot of money on those lenses that you're using. And if you put a really inexpensive piece of glass, like they were showing, Camera Corner was showing in that slide that I just showed you, where it's just a piece of sheet glass and it doesn't have a really good quality to it, that you might have this nice sharp lens that you paid good money for, and now you've put an inferior glass on the front of it, and so that nice sharp lens is now giving you pictures that are softer than they used to be because of the quality of that little filter that's going on the front. So if you're shopping for one and you look at a description, it says it has shot glass or water white glass or some other type of optical, high quality optical glass on it, that's what you want. Another thing that you might see in a description is it will say it has a high rate of transmission, or HRT. That is talking about the light loss that you have. And CPLs have density to them. So it depends how much light is being let through. And you can lose 1 to 3 stops of light. If you want one that has a lighter amount of loss, you will be wanting to look for that in particular, and sometimes that is designated with the HRT significance. So that's something to consider, and we'll talk about why in just a few minutes. Also, occasionally you'll get a filter, and this goes for any kind of filter really on all of these. All these qualities are something you would look for in any filter. And color shift can be a problem. I find that color shift tends to be a bigger problem maybe on a neutral density than I would have seen in a polarizer, but it's got density to it, so it certainly could have a color shift. And so if you go and get one and you try it for a while and you're noticing that you're getting a significant shift from what it looks like without a filter on, then you might want to think about, well, this isn't very good in that respect, and you might want to get a different one, change, return it and get something else. So you don't want a color shift on it. Now, what does a CPL control? Again, this is the circular polarizer is what CPL stands for. So what its main duty is to get rid of the reflections on water or glass, leaves, surfaces, or buildings, and any other surface that you might be working with. It's catching a reflection from probably the sky, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the sky. It could be indoors, and so therefore it could be catching a reflection off of the ceiling or such. So that's its primary job, is to get rid of reflections. When doing this, it tends to add contrast to your picture just by the science behind it. Getting rid of that reflective quality that's on the surfaces adds contrast. It also adds color saturation. And this time of year, fall, if you still have leaves on the trees, is a great time to notice that color saturation that you're getting with or without. Excuse me, it'd be with versus without, because it cuts down, it gets rid of the reflection. And on a normal sunny day, that reflection looks like a real pale blue on the top of a leaf or something. And if it cuts that away, that's why you're getting that saturation boost. You can also use it to remove haze. Now, I find that it doesn't remove haze 100%, and it depends, of course, which direction you are and so on. But you can use it to try to minimize some of the haze you're getting. And if you're out shooting a landscape and it's maybe a mountain scene, or at least it's in the distance, whatever scene you're shooting has a great distance in it, you'll get that atmospheric haze. You've seen it too on a humid day, and it kind of can help cut through some of that. But what also happens is, because a circular polarizer does have density to it, it's going to add time to your exposures. So whether that is a plus or not to you will depend probably upon the situation. But I'm going to get into that again too on another slide, so I won't go too in depth right now. But know that it does add density, so it does add time. And one tip I wanted to give you before I left this slide was, if you would like to try out a circular polarizer, you don't have one, you're thinking of buying one, Ted has said that if you go and bring your camera into Camera Corner, he will let you take some of the polarizers out to the parking lot and go shoot a little bit on your camera so you can see how it works. And so if you're going to do that, I think he has 2 different ProMaster price levels. So he has a lesser expensive one and a higher quality one. And he'll let you take them both out and test them out on your camera. And then you can decide, you can probably take some pictures if you want to decide on the spot, or if you want to take it home and look at them on your computer, you could do that and go back. But if you're going to do that, I would suggest you look for a sunny day, because you're going to get more variation. You're going to see more response from that CPL if you do it on a sunny day. And if you're lucky enough to get a day that has like the puffy clouds, not overcast, but just the white puffy clouds, that will work even better. So you can kind of see those clouds and what it does to it. Also consider going sometime like mid-morning or late afternoon. So if you can only go at noon, then go at noon. But if you can go to those fringe sides of noon, then I would do that, because the angle of the sun is just, again, a little better, so you can see a little bit more variation between non-polarizing and polarizing. So just a suggestion there, a little tip for you. So let's talk about, so now you've decided what you want and you're going to buy it. What size do you buy? My suggestion is you look at your lenses and you find out which one has the largest front element. So how big is the front element on your biggest lens, or the biggest one? So, and either get that size or go one size larger. You know, if you have 3 or 4 different lenses, and say you've got 2 or 3 front element sizes on those lenses, You could get one CPL for each different size, but that's a lot of money, especially if you're spending over $100 per lens, or excuse me, per filter. You know, you would be much better off, in my opinion, to do what I suggest, and that would be to get one that fits the largest lens, or maybe go one step larger. So in my case, my biggest front element on one of my lenses is 77 millimeters. So for me to buy a new one, I would either get a 77, or I might even go up to an 82 millimeter. Thinking, well, what if I got a lens, because they seem to keep getting bigger. So what if my next lens I bought was an 82, I'd have to get another filter, or I could just get an 82 now and use it. So something to consider, either go with the biggest size you have, or maybe one step beyond that. And then, well, how do you use that if it's too big for your, say, 58 millimeter? Well, that's when you would buy what they call step-up rings. And the step-up ring will help you fit a larger piece onto a smaller lens. And so let's take a look at that. So here's a picture I found online. And this is showing we have, say, a 77 millimeter filter. And these step-up rings can be used with any filter. It doesn't have to just be with your CPL. It can be with any of them. But say this lens is has a 46 millimeter front element, then you would get a step-up ring that would look like this. It would say 46-77. Why? Because you got a 46-inch lens and you're going to go to a 77-inch filter. So you simply screw this on, and this inside area here, if you can see my cursor, is the 46 in this case, and this outer edge is the 77, which matches the filter. So when you screw it on, you don't see this black part within the lens. The lens doesn't see that. It's sitting outside of the lens. And then if you had another one, and in this situation, it's a 52 millimeter. So again, then you would buy a separate step-up ring that was a 52 millimeter up to a 77. And then this lens happens to be a 72 millimeter lens. So you would get a step-up ring that is a 77 millimeter that steps up to a 77. And then you would have one for each lens, or each size lens, and you can interchange that one filter to go on all three different size lenses. There are also step down rings, which we won't talk about those right now, but just so you know, there are step ups and step downs. These would be a step up, and they're inexpensive. They come in two different metals for the most part. They're either aluminum or brass. And the brass are a little bit more expensive, but they're not high in any. Even the brass ones aren't terribly high. They are higher than I guess I want to pay for. They're about $30 in that range, where these aluminums can be anywhere from, say, about $8 to $12. So see, they're not very much. So you can get 3 of them for the price of one brass one, pretty much. But anyway, you would get that, and then you'd use that. So it makes your bigger filter more usable. Now, if you don't know how to figure out what size your lenses are, and I know most of you do, but just in case someone doesn't, if you look at the front element of your lens, a lot of times it's right up here, and it's this circle with a line through it and then a number. So this one would be 67 millimeters. So that's what size step-up ring you would buy, or filter, whichever you choose. And in this example over here where the arrow's pointing to, this is on the barrel of your lens, and generally they're written kind of where the size of the lens is written, but that isn't the case on all of them. I have one that they wanted to keep it a secret. I don't know, it's underneath side. It didn't have white paint in it, so you could see it very easily. But this is also on the barrel of this one, showing the size of it. And if you don't see it there easily, you can look on the inside of your lens cap, and it's usually written in there too. So that's how you find out what size your lens element is. So let's talk about some of the physical things and some of the useful things of a CPL is. A CPL filter is made up of 2 parts. One of them is the threaded ring that connects the filter to your lens. So it's what you thread on, where you thread it on. And then it has a separate piece, so a second piece that's actually holding the polarizing filter. And it rotates freely. So the one ring is screwing on and then the other ring rotates. One thing, I've got it stuck in here, it's probably out of place, but polarizers work the best when you are polarizing at 90 degrees to the sun. Now that's not to say that it doesn't work other ways, but what I mean is if the sun is to your 90 degrees, and we'll talk about a little bit more in depth in that in a second. So we'll just pause on that one for now. Like I mentioned a minute ago, a polarizing filter will add density to the light coming through. So it makes less light come through to your sensor. So what happens is if you're using aperture mode or program mode, the first thing that it's going to do is your camera is going to adjust for the less light by reducing your shutter speed. So you just need to be aware that when you put on a polarizer, it is going to reduce your shutter speed in most situations. So you need to be aware of that and be aware of how fast that shutter speed is now. So is it still fast enough for you to hand hold if that's what you were doing? If you were on a tripod, then there's no problem. It will be a little longer, but that doesn't affect you like it would if you were hand holding an image. Also on the outside, on the frame of a polarizer, you will see like a little arrow or a line, or maybe it's a dot on the side of the rotating piece of the filter. And what you can do is it usually shows you the direction that the sun is for. You put it in the direction that the sun is to get the maximum effect out of that filter. You should play with that and see where it is for you, because it's going to vary according to where the sun is and and the angle you're at and so on. So put it on your camera and give it a test and say, okay, this seems to be the maximum. Now where's the arrow? And then what happens is once you figure out, well, if I want the maximum, then the arrow is in this position while I'm shooting in this direction, then you can set up your next shot much faster. If you take it off and you put it back on, then you'll know, oh, well, the arrow needs to be over here. I don't have to fuss about it quite as much. But it's always good to see where you're going. I think they came about putting these little designations on there back probably during film days, when you weren't seeing, you know, what you see is what you get now kind of thing when you look through the viewfinder a lot. And back when it was film days, it was a little bit different, especially if you weren't using an SLR, you were using a different type of viewfinder on it. So I think that's when it came about, but do check that out because that may be a good tool for you. So another thing is, if you'd like to see how it works when it's not on your camera, a kind of a fun way to do it is the light coming out of your computer screen is a light that reacts really well to a polarizer. So if you hold your polarizer up in front of your computer screen with the inside of the element, so the inside of the filter, like it would be the inside going towards the camera, is facing towards you, and the other side is the side that would be facing away from the camera, so outside, that would be facing your computer. If you hold it up and you hold it by the threaded ring and then you rotate the rotatable ring, you will see it change from being very little effect to going completely black. And so if you just want to see how it works, you can just test it out just for fun. So I thought I would offer that to you. And then you can go ahead and put it on your computer, yeah. You could go ahead and put it on your camera and give it a look too. And then, you know, play around with it. Oh, this is, you know, I'm seeing just a little bit of action to nothing. Oh, I go the other direction. Oh, it's getting darker. Yeah, I can see it the leaves starting to look better in my landscape or whatever the case may be, or the sky's looking different. So you you should really experiment, take your time, play around with it, and see how it works for you. And back to, I had this little note about that arrow. Again, it's like I was just talking about how to use that. So you can go ahead and test that out. So a polarizer, I started to talk to you about this a few slides ago, and I thought I'd get into it more right now. But a polarizer works best, or it gives you maximum results, if you are at a 90 degrees to the sun. Now, if you don't exactly know what that means, I'll really break it down really basically. If you're looking at the back of your camera, your camera's pointing towards the subject you're shooting, and if you can put your arms straight out from your sides, so if they're at your sides, you bring them up to shoulder height, straight out, not in front of you, but on your side. And if the sun is at either fingertip, you are at 90 degrees to the sun. So it works, it gets its maximum results then. If it's any other place, so say if you were using 2 o'clock, that would be 3 o'clock, would be 90 degrees. So say if you were at 1 or 2 o'clock with the sun, then you're not going to get the same results. You won't get as much result, but you will still get some result. So does it have to be at 90 degrees to use a polarizer? Absolutely not. But the results will be slightly different with each location shifting off of that 90 degree point. Okay, so will it work on a cloudy day? Yeah, it actually does. It doesn't work the same, or it doesn't work, it doesn't have as big an effect on as many different things, but it still will help you remove that reflection off of surfaces such as wet rocks, the leaves on the trees, maybe the street. So you can go ahead and use it, and it still will help you get that saturation that you might want when you get from removing that reflection. So yes, it works on a cloudy day. Will it work on haze? Yes, again, it will work on haze to some degree. I don't think it ever gets rid of it totally. And I think certain days or when the sun's at a certain height, you will get different effects or different amounts of effect. So try it. You know, I think when you're, say, on vacation or somewhere and you're taking a mountain landscape and it's really hazy, give it a shot. See if you can get a little bit of that haze out, because if you can get some of it out and a little bit more in Photoshop, it will really help your picture come to life, or to see what, you know, maybe what you're more expecting to see, I guess. So here's a couple other tips that I've just got thrown in here. A CPL used, if you use it on a wide angle lens that's wider than, say, 24 millimeters, you could get some uneven effects in the sky. So because of the wide angle and the way it polarizes light, sometimes you can get some uneven stuff going on. And this was a tip from Jay. He noticed that if you're shooting like a rocky landscape, say you're in the mountains or such, and the rocks, those reflect a ton of light. Whether it's a sunny day or a cloudy day, they still are reflecting a lot of light. So that's a great time to put a CPL filter on. And if you dial out and get rid of some of that reflection off those lights, you'll get a lot more intensity and saturation in those colors of the rocks. And he's also noticed that it will then give you a good sky exposure. Sometimes, and I'm going to show you an example of this, sometimes you can get overcooked on those CPLs and skies. So we'll see an example of that here in a few minutes. But he found that if you use it with the rocks, you tend to get a good sky exposure. So we're going to look at some pictures now. I have a few pictures to show you. And this I took so I could show you that you don't have to just have nothing or full effect. You can dial it to whatever you want in between. So if you look at the first one, it really doesn't have a lot of, well, it has no polarizer effect to it. The sky's relatively light, just notice the trees, and we still have, we have the reflection on the lake, and you'll notice we still have the reflection through all of these. And in this case, when I shot this, the sun was not to my 90 degrees. It was about at, say, about 1:30 or 2 o'clock, if you use the clock scenario for figuring that out. So it was kind of in the direction I was shooting. So I didn't get quite that intense blue in the sky, and I didn't totally get rid of the reflections. You can see it dulls it down, but it didn't get rid of it by any means. But when you can look at this, you'll notice there's a little bit more saturation between some polarizing, and you get into the bottom one and there's even more saturation in the trees with that. Here's one of the, with the sky included, and you can see without, it looks fine, but when you put a polarizer, you can see how much that cloud pops out from the blue sky. The blue sky is obviously darker. And the trees in the, around the lake, you can see a lot more color showing up in them. So you're getting that saturation in the trees. This one's obviously nothing special as far as the picture goes, but it was taken just to show you how it looks with close-up water. So this water was close to my feet, close to shore, and the one on the left, look how blue it looks. These, by the way, these pictures, all of them that I've shown you so far, I've done no editing to them. They're just straight out of camera. So this too, you can see how blue the water is. You can see the cloud in the foreground here. And when you look at the one with the polarizer on it, you'll see the cloud is almost completely gone. You can still see a little bit of it, but you can definitely see the rocks better, and it got rid of some of that blue that's close to me. You can see it's still happening back out in here as it moves away. The angle of my camera with the angle of the surface of the water causes that to happen, where I didn't get it all to go away, but at least I was able to see the bottom of the pond or the lake that was here. Now, obviously, this isn't a beautiful, beautiful rocks like you would see on some, you know, mountain lakes or something like that, but at least it gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. This one I think is really quite dramatic, and so you can see with and without a polarizer what it can do to foliage. And that's why, look how much more saturated the one on the right is. That's why if you use it during fall foliage time, that's why you take these kind of browny orange colors and they become real orange because you let all the colors show through that were there. This one I took inside. So I think a lot of times we don't think about the fact that we're still getting glare inside. And this is not a shiny table by any means. But if you had a shiny table, it would do the same thing. If you notice the candle and the tray and such, those are all about the same exposure. That's, you know, that didn't change at all. But look at the table that has a little bit of reflection on it. There's windows on the left, plus whatever was bouncing off of the ceiling and walls. And then when I polarized it to the full extent of the polarization in there, you can see how dark and how much the grain pops out and such on the one on the right. This was taken on a cloudy day, and it's not a very good picture, but it does illustrate the point. The one on the left, while they don't look a lot different, there is definitely a difference. The one on the left, all you can see is the glare on the top of this beam here. And if you look on the one on the right, you can actually see some of the different texture that was actually on there. So there is a difference between these two, and it's totally getting rid of the reflection so you can actually see the surface of this beam that was right there. Now, these are to show you some things that have gone wrong and to illustrate some of the points that I talked about earlier. The one on the left is a wide angled shot. I don't know how wide it was. I should have looked. I'm sorry, I didn't. And it shows that filter, the frame of the filter is showing through on the corners of this because it was thick, and that wider angle of view is showing the thickness of that frame going around there. If it was a less wide, if it was maybe, I'll say this was probably somewhere around 24 millimeters, 28 millimeters, and you could see it. And if it was sitting up at 70 millimeters, I probably would not have seen it. So that's what happens. The other thing is, I know that I did this, is it was not only the thickness of the polarizer filter, but I think I threaded it on top of a UV filter. So often, you know, people will have UV filters to protect their lens, and then they just put it on top of that because that UV filter's on there all the time. If you're going to use a circular polarizer, or really any other filter for that matter, if you're going to shoot fairly wide, you should take off that UV filter when you're using another filter. Not to say that you can't stack filters, because you certainly can. If you were wanting to use maybe a neutral density filter and it wasn't giving you enough density and you wanted to add more, well, the polarizer has some, so you could double up on that and you could screw the one on top of the other. And again, you're adding thickness, so you may have to watch out how wide you shoot, or you've got some editing to do one way or the other. But it will show if you get too much thickness of filters built up in front of a lens, and that was my point on that. The one on the right was been over polarized. For most people don't like that ultra dark blue sky. I think it's kind of cool. If you want to use it for creative purposes, then that's what it would be. This one also has been shot, and you can still see the frame of the filter up in these corners particularly. But it's been over polarized. If it's an effect you want for creativity, go for it. Most people will look at it. If you're having somebody judge your picture, they may comment. We'll say they may comment on that sky being so dark, but I kind of think it can be a neat option. So you just do whatever you like as far as creativity goes. This is another one I wanted to point out, this one on the left. I don't know how much you can see it on your screen, but well, I'll tell you what I'm seeing here on mine. If you look real closely, you may be able to see like a U-shaped area, and it's darker inside this U, and then it's kind of light here and it's light here. So you're getting a little bit of lightness at the bottom, and then it's dark in this area. That's what can happen. Polarizers can have that uneven effect on a sky. And this was a portion of a pano that I was shooting. And when I shot it like this, and then you put those panos together when they're getting this kind of U-shaped thing going on, then you have these odd skies. It's got this scallopy effect, or maybe sometimes you'll get dark out on the edges and the light in the center, and then you've got these striped things going on in the center or throughout the sky, which is not what you want, and it's really noticeable when you put them together in a pano. So you need to be aware that it's a possibility. And so if you don't want to have to deal with it in editing when you get home, what you may want to do is shoot with a polarizer and shoot another set without a polarizer, and then you may be able to replace or change the sky out or fix it, because the polarizer will look good on the foul foliage, but it may have messed up your sky. Excuse me. Okay, the picture on the right, I did not use a polarizer, or if I had a polarizer in, I didn't dial it in correctly. So I didn't polarize the light that was hitting these rocks. So I just wanted to give you an example of something that you might consider if you were interested in the look of putting a polarizer on when you're shooting, say, something like a waterfall, and it was in a shaded area, so it was under a canopy of trees, but it was still getting this reflection from above. So this is another opportunity to get rid of the sheen on top of these rocks. Now, you may or may not want it. It's all a matter of what you want to create. but it will work on something like that. So you can try it. I don't have an example to show you, like a before and after. I wish I did, but I don't. But I did want to talk to you about it, so I'll show you this one. So let's see. So one thing I want you to remember is not all photographs need a CPL. You don't need to get rid of the reflections on everything. And I think this is a good example of one that I'm so glad I have the reflections. That's what the picture's all about, is the reflection on this lake. And so if you would have tried to get rid of some of it, it would have changed the picture, and in my opinion, not for the better. But then there are other cases where you want to get rid of the shine on the top of the water. And in this case, I think this would be a good example of that. Is I didn't want the water, like back in here, to be in this area too. I wanted to be able to see the rocky bottom of this little stream going through here, or I don't know what it was, stream, lake, whatever it was. But anyway, I wanted to see those rocks down there. And so a polarizer was used to get rid of the glare that would have been on top of the water for that part.